before you, and Father, I thank you for this opportunity to be here. Father, we thank you for this council, and we pray that you give them wisdom. Father, we thank you for staff. We pray that you would help them as they bow their knee in fear to you, that you would give them wisdom and knowledge. Father, on this election day, Lord, we have faith in you and we trust you. We know that you're in charge of all things and that you assign that we rest. We thank you for this day. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. Would you join me in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you both very much. Can we have the roll call, please?
Councilmember Yonker.
Here.
Councilmember Hagestad is absent. Councilmember Hess.
Present.
Councilmember Guy.
Present.
Councilmember Hustis.
Here.
Vice Mayor Goodman.
Present.
Mayor Orsborn.
Present. Thank you very much. Item number 2, comments from the public. Members of the audience may comment on any non-agenda item of interest. I have one for public comment, and it's Carol Reynolds talking about permitting.
Council, thank you. I gave a presentation some years ago in Las Vegas, and the first sentence kind of stuck with me. Inaction in government is not always a single word. The reason I'm here is actually to talk about the permitting process and the permits. I applied for a permit, was having some difficulty, and out of the blue, Larry, my cheat sheet, Larry Francis, just to prove I didn't really forget. Yep, Larry Francis called me on the phone. Never saw him, never met him. And he says, gee, you guys having a problem? I said, yeah, and I explained what my situation was. Told him it's probably a paper form that I've neglected or didn't know about. And he assigned Susanna Villa to assist in the project. Within a very few days, they were able to get the paperwork. I filled out the form. The paperwork finished, the process done, and they proved that government in action really is 3 words. So, with that, thank you.
Thank you very much. It's good seeing you, Carol. All right, that's all the public comment speaker request cards I have. We don't have any more over there, do we, Miss Lucinda?
No additional speaker requests.
Okay, item 3, we have no awards, presentations, and proclamations for tonight. Item number 4, consent agenda items and new business. Approval of items on the consent agenda. All items with an asterisk are considered to be routine matters and be enacted by one motion and vote of the city council. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a council member requests. This section may include the approval of minutes from previous meetings. Council, actually, Vice Mayor, I think you have one that you're looking to pull.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to pull item 4J.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor and Council, it's my understanding that Vice Mayor Goodman would like to remove 4J from the consent agenda, and we'll consider that separately after the consent agenda. So if we could go ahead and take a motion on the consent agenda, get that out of the way, and then we'll pick up 4J in just a moment.
Yes, thank you.
He's putting words in your mouth there.
Oh.
Perfectly. All right, so Council, the consent agenda, all items less 4J. What is your pleasure?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we approve consent agenda item 4A as in Adam through 4R as in Robert, with the exception of 4J as in John.
Second.
We have outstanding. Okay, we've got that locked into our handy-dandy voting machines. All in favor, say aye and vote on the machine.
Aye.
And opposed? And passes unanimous. I was waiting for the scoreboard to come up. We don't do the scoreboard? All right, that was the scoreboard. Thank you. You can holler at me, that's okay. Item 4J, Vice Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, just would like to table this item and consider it on a future agenda. I think some of the language is a bit confusing, and I think staff needs some time to kind of sort that out.
Mr. Mayor and Vice Mayor Goodman, had an opportunity to talk with Vice Mayor earlier this afternoon, and he brought to my attention an irregularity with that 4J item. We think we can fix that and be back at the November 19th city council meeting, regular city council meeting. So if there was an appetite to table this matter, if we could continue it to a date certain, which would be the November 19th city council meeting, that would be helpful.
Okay. Do you want to make that motion first?
What he said. Move that we table this item to the November 19th meeting.
All right, so we have a motion made by Vice Mayor Goodman, second by Councilmember Hess. Actually, let's redo those because they just adjusted the date in there. So if you would make that motion on your pilot there.
Letting me.
Right now? There we go. Seconded by Councilmember Hess. All in favor of continuing, if you would vote on your machines and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And opposed? And we are continued on 4J. Okay, items 5A and 5B. Each of these items are being continued until the November 19th, 2024 regular council meeting, so no action will be taken on either of these items tonight. Am I reading that correctly? That's
Yes, Mayor.
okay. All right, we will press on to item 6A. Council is to hold a public hearing and approve or deny an appeal by Paul Gilbert Wiley, PLLC, on behalf of Miedema Produce, Inc. Buckeye Planning and Zoning Commission, September 10, 2024, approval of a site plan. The case number is listed for Phase 1 of a proposed rail-served recycling facility consisting of 61,812 square foot downstream sorting, building a 15,493 square foot administrative and non-ferrous processing building, expandable to 56,764 square feet, and related screened storage yards and loading areas on property located within the General Commerce GC zoning district.
Mr. Mayor, if I may approach, I was handed some materials from the appellant that they wanted the council to have an opportunity.
Yes, sir. And then Ken, you're going to lead us on this one, correct?
Yes, Mayor. This will be a new process as far as, at least I'm concerned, with the city. It's been a while since the council has considered an appeal of a Planning and Zoning Commission decision. Mayor, you described the request per the agenda. This is an appeal by an adjacent property owner of a site plan that was approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission back in September. Procedurally, tonight is going to be a little different. Typically, staff will start with a presentation and then go to public hearing and let the applicant speak and those types of things. In this case, the appellant, which is representatives for Miedema Produce, which is the Gilbert Bliley law firm, will be presenting first. Staff will present second. And then there will be a public hearing, at which time the site plan applicant, AIM Recycling, will be giving a presentation as well. So stay with us tonight. This is kind of new, and with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Gilbert.
Before we hop into that, Ken, Scott, you're about to say something.
Mayor and council, a couple of other things, because this is a little bit unusual. Due to the fact that the city is, a decision is being appealed, we have retained outside counsel to represent city council in their decision-making. That's Mr. McGuire. He's on the call, so he'll be listening. My role will be in defense of the Planning and Zoning Commission's decision, and so that's a little bit unusual. And then one last thing we neglected to mention is that the appellant, after the public hearing portion, will be afforded a 5-minute rebuttal period to respond to anything that might have been said during the public comment.
Okay, and then just to clarify, and this probably goes to Andrew McGuire, a little bit different than our typical role up here. Andrew, can you explain specifically what our role is as, I think we've used the term in the past, quasi-judicial? I don't know if that's correct, just like saying big words out loud in public. Andrew, can you explain to us what exactly our role is here on this specific item?
Mr. Mayor and members of the council, I think you hit it on the head. I believe that you are sitting in a quasi-judicial capacity tonight because you're hearing an appeal. So the appeal typically would be of the things that are presented to you on the record. So the staff has done a good job of providing you with the record of the decision of the Planning and Zoning Commission on the site plan. So all of that is in front of you. Any of the information presented to you tonight, all of those things are within the realm of things that you can consider as part of the appeal. Because your code is fairly wide open in terms of what the council's remedies or authority is on this appeal, when we get to that point, if you would like me to weigh in, if the council is considering various options, I'd be happy to do so, but no reason to bore everybody on the front end.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Paul Gilbert. I'm with the law firm of Gilbert Bliley. With me tonight is Kurt Valdir, who's a planner in my office, who will be assisting in the presentation. We also have Todd Miedema, who is here, and Mr. Mayor, I'd like to reserve a few minutes for him to speak as well. He's the owner of the property and obviously quite involved in this case. Okay, thank you. Before I get started, I'd like to introduce our response letter that your city attorney passed out to you. There were numerous erroneous remarks and some grossly misleading description of the timeline in this case that had been previously presented to you. You may ask, well, that letter was submitted roughly 2 weeks ago. Why are you submitting it so late? Well, the applicant of the original case didn't send us a copy. We didn't even know that a letter had been filed in opposition to this case. We found out when we downloaded the agenda on Friday. So we got it to you as fast as we could. I'm going to refer just briefly to it, but it's important that we refer to that because the Ames attorney has basically mischaracterized our pursuit to seek a compromise in their letter, and I think it's important that all the facts are before you this evening. We only found out again that we were reviewing the city, when we reviewed the city council's agenda packet on Friday. So again, pardon my redundancy, but that's why you're just receiving it now. I'll refer to the highlights later on in my presentation. However, we want to keep this focused on planning. That's what we're here to discuss, and that's what I'm going to spend the majority of my time on today. And we'll see if we need to get into that in more detail on my rebuttal. Now for the context. We represent the Miedema property that is indicated in yellow there, And we're opposed to the opposition, and in opposition to the Ames recycling facility that has been approved, site plan been approved by your planning commission. We point out to you that that recycling facility is surrounded by agricultural fields and related uses for miles in all directions. Our client, Medema Produce, owns and manages one of the large agricultural fields next door of about 155 acres. A little bit about my client. They basically grow and pack and ship produce nationwide. One of the signature crops they cultivate between Arizona and Michigan is radishes, and that's what we're growing on the site now. However, their ultimate intention, as we reason together, we want you to focus on this. We didn't buy the property simply to grow radishes. We bought the property because we want to annex the property to the town of Buckeye and establish a packaging plant where we package our produce and ship it virtually all over the United States. And unfortunately, our current packaging program in Surprise has been surrounded by other uses that are inconsistent, and so we need to move that packaging facility from Surprise to here, and that's why we purchased the property about 5 years ago. So the growing of the radishes is simply an interim use. Our eventual use, and I can't emphasize this enough, is to make sure that you understand we want to do a packaging plant here, and that's why we're opposed to the approval of the site plan for this very intense industrial recycling facility. We come here tonight with one simple request. All we're asking for is that you require, as a condition of the site plan approval, an 8-foot CMU wall all along the approximately 2,500 feet border between the 2,000 feet. That's why Kurt's here. A lot of pressure up here tonight. The 2,000 feet border adjacent to our property. We're proposing a CMU wall all along the property to protect us, and we'll talk about those protections just shortly, from the recycling facility. It is very true that we've made other requests early on in the process. Ames Recycling chose not to honor any of our requests, which is a source of major chagrin to us, but we limited it just to the CMU wall. Unfortunately, Ames did not want to participate in any discussions or negotiations early on, so we had to face the fact that they got their site plan approved basically at the same time that they decided to meet with us. We weren't even given a copy of the site plan. We had to file a public records request to get a copy of the site plan so that we could see what was going on. And even then, Ames did not talk to us for a considerable period of time. We had our first meeting with them in May 17th, and at that meeting, the representatives from Ames said, we'll get right back to you within a week. We were not able to meet with them to discuss that site plan for 3 months. And unfortunately, that came basically on the eve of the Planning Commission hearing. We'd like to show you the following graph. Oh, I'm sorry, better than I thought. Here's the issue, very simply. You see in red there, the area we would like to propose that instead of a chain link fence with slats, that the Ames recycling facility be required to put an 8-foot CMU wall. They're putting an 8-foot CMU wall in the area in green there, right at the very first of their site, but they would have not agreed to extend the CMU wall for the 2,000 feet remaining on the property. Now, your ordinance says in the Development Code, Section 5.9, for industrial buildings, the purpose of the site plan review is to protect adjacent uses. We submit to you this evening that that obligation under your ordinance has not been addressed. And for that reason, we are requesting tonight that you do just that you give us this protection from this very intense industrial recycling facility. The incompatible nature with this high-intensity industrial facility and adjacent agricultural uses should require additional protection for our facility, both now and what we hope to build in the packaging plant in the very near future. So the bottom line is we're requesting extending that 8-foot wall all along our border. Now, here are the issues. The proposed chain link fence is simply not adequate. These photos we're showing you are from an existing Ames recycling facility in the McDowell area in the city of Phoenix. As you can see from these photos, it is clear that the chain link fence is not well maintained at their other facilities and is extremely porous. Why are we concerned? We're concerned because we want to build a packaging plant, and pests are a major concern in the food industry, whether you are growing, packaging, or shipping any food products. They can cause a number of potential diseases if they get in the food supply at any point in the process. For this reason, Primus GFS guidelines, which we have to adhere to, and they do audits of a packaging plant. We're very familiar with them. They have a very strict food safety chain scheme, and again, as indicated, we are annually audited. Basically, our customers will not buy our packaged products from us if we do not pass these audit inspections by Primus GFS. Any observation of contaminated ingredient, product, or packaging material qualifies as an automatic failure from these issues. The Food Safety Modernization Act requires that, quote, you must take those measures reasonably necessary to protect covered produce, food contact surfaces, and food packaging materials from contamination by pests. Furthermore, the Primus GFS guideline specifically states, and this quote is up there, I want to read it to you, there should be a documented risk assessment for the facility to identify and control any food safety hazards relevant to facility locations. And here's the kicker, most important, an adjacent land use, for example, industrial activity. So that's the standard we have to comply with. They're concerned about industrial activity. We are not asking that the Ames recycling facility not locate here. We've lost that battle. You will hear tonight that it is allowed as a matter of right. We disagree with that assessment, but we are not challenging it. Tonight, we are only challenging that we receive the protection that your ordinance mandates. Pictured here are more photos from Ames operations in Phoenix from outside the fence line. You can see heaps of trash and recycled materials piled higher than the semi-trucks parked on the property. Here are some additional photos from the facility in Phoenix that show more of the same piles of recycling material, and their chain link fence in the lower right-hand corner shows a flimsy, porous fence. It will simply not properly contain the vast amount of trash that is accumulated on the Ames property from their operations, nor protect against rodents coming across on our property. The bottom line is a flimsy chain link fence is simply not appropriate or sufficient to provide adequate protection for our facility. The exposed nature of this recycling facility, having raw materials littered across the site and in such close proximity to our property. Notice these piles of trash and recycled materials are right up against the property line and the chain link fence. I'm going to wait and talk further about the timeline. I'll reserve that for my rebuttal. But we disagree vigorously with the timeline that has been presented to you by the representatives of the Ames Recycling Facility. We'll talk about that more in a moment. I'd like to defer the rest of my time to Mr. Todd Miedema, who is the owner of the property, with your permission, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I think we were gonna try and keep to about 15 minutes each. I've lost track of the time that.
I've only gone about 2 minutes.
Yeah, that's right. I
All
bet.
right, Todd, go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, we have about 3 minutes left.
Okay.
All right, council members of the city of Buckeye, thank you for giving me a few minutes of your time tonight. I'll move quickly and keep this brief. Miedema Produce is a family-owned company that has been growing and shipping in the West Valley for just about 30 years now. We employ over 200 people, 200 plus in peak season, and we ship fresh veg all over North America. Our land on Baseline Road is in our plan to continue to grow, add products, and add jobs to the West Valley. This is an agricultural area, a food production area that is getting a massive makeover to our detriment. American Iron and Metal is coming into our agricultural community and drastically changing how the land is used. They are causing the change. They should bear the financial impact it has on their neighbors. Part of the general intent of the Industrial Building Code is, as Mr. Gilbert said, to protect adjacent uses. We are an adjacent use. You've seen the pictures of two of the facilities in the valley. You can clearly see the inability of a chain link fence to stop not just pests, but also trash and debris. It's a major issue. A CMU wall is the clear option. Our food safety certification bodies ask that when food safety concern is identified on adjacent land, we work with our neighbors to find some middle ground to keep our food supply safe and free of contamination. That's what we're trying to do. It has been said that a chain link fence is adequate. It is not. When you look at the facilities that are developing land right alongside our facility in Surprise right now, Taylor Morrison is putting in homes there. They put up a CMU wall. Just down the road in one of our fields, they put in a water substation. They erected a 10-foot CMU wall. In the other direction, along another one of our fields, a huge tip-up building was going up, and they put a lengthy CMU wall all the way around the facility. CMU walls are the standard. They're clearly successful, much superior to a chain link fence, and they are the standard in the valley. In conclusion, I'd like to say American Iron Metal is a hugely successful company with 90 locations globally and over $2 billion in annual revenue. A CMU wall for them is not a big matter. They've got the funds, they can do it. We are not standing in the way of this recycling facility. We are good neighbors. Please contact the City of Surprise and ask. But as for aesthetics, food safety, and compatibility, the CMU wall is what we need at that site to protect our future interests. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now Ken, you're up. Okay.
Thank you again, Mayor, council members. Thank you, Mr. Gilbert, for that presentation. Tonight, I'm going to be, presenting more of a background as far as what the proposed site plan process was from the city's perspective, give you a better idea of what the use actually is, and then kind of outline steps. So as you've heard, on September 10th, Planning and Zoning Commission did recommend approval of the site plan for AIM recycling, subject to conditions A through RR, which was recommended by staff. So basically, Planning and Zoning Commission concurred with staff that the site plan should be approved. As the city attorney mentioned, or actually as Andrew McGuire mentioned, our process in the code is very open as far as who can appeal any decision of the Planning and Zoning Commission. And thus, Mr. Gilbert has appealed this on behalf of his client tonight. High level, staff recommended approval of the AIM site plan because it conforms to the general plan designation of employment, which is applied to this property, as well as the Medema property to the west and properties to the east. I will show you a map in just a bit, but the employment designation has been on the property since the adoption of the general plan in 2017. This was not part of the more recent amendment to change portions of the city to employment. So in the future, the city would anticipate adjoining property owned by the appellant to develop with light industrial types of uses. Packaging plant certainly would be consistent with that as they're proposing it. There have been no proposals, to annex the property or to develop that, point that out. The site plan and proposed use do conform to all the requirements in the development code as staff sees it. All of the setbacks, all of the screening requirements, building heights, the use itself do comply with the general commerce zoning district. And there's no outstanding issues for any of the reviewing departments. Just to walk back and kind of look at the site, 44.3 gross acres overall, kind of an L-shaped property. The initial phase, 95.9 acres overall. The initial phase is about 44 and change. The zoning of the property, industrial, general commerce, has been in place since 2007. And I mentioned the employment designation on the property has been since the general plan was adopted back in 2018. The property is adjacent to the Union Pacific Rail on the south, which is why the city has long viewed this corridor for industrial uses. The proposed use is different than the pictures that were included in Mr. Gilbert's presentation. AIM is a big company, as he mentioned, but this particular facility will not be shredding and accumulating the types of recyclables that the facility in Phoenix provides for. This basically is a facility where pre-shredded recyclable materials, metals primarily, will be sorted. They'll come in via train and truckload to the site. So there'll be, smaller pieces of materials, not full cars, not junk cars, not sewing machines and everything else. And they will come pre-shredded. They will be run through a very massive, intelligent machine that's enclosed in a building. And then they will be basically sorted into different bins by material type, and then they'll be shipped out of the property. The pile and bin storage of materials is limited in height to a maximum of 15 feet. So you won't see the types of piles that you saw on that Phoenix site. And the piles that you will see are going to look more like landscape material than they would any sort of junkyard type of situation. And there will be screening from off-property, particularly from baseline. I mentioned there will be no crushing or shredding occurring on this property. It's really just a sorting operation. There will be some open to the public. If you have some aluminum cans you want to drop off and sell for a few bucks, you will be able to do that to the general public to be transported off-site for further processing. But that is not the primary focus of this particular use. So I mentioned the phasing. The first phase, which is all that was approved, is this 44.3 acres shown in the yellow. Future phase, components to be determined, would be the remainder of the property, the balance of the property. The site plan features a roughly 60,000 square foot downstream sorting building. This is the building that will have the advanced machinery that can determine what material is what and sort it out and put it into piles and bins. At the front of the site, adjacent to baseline, so this will be most of what you see from the street, an admin building, as well as some processing within that building. There is screened bin and pile storage and loading. I mentioned the height limitation of 15 feet. Most of that storage will occur behind in basically enclosed bins, so you won't even see the materials. There is a rail extension that is proposed from the Union Pacific line, shown there in red, that would basically run up the west side of the site, where the freight cars would be loaded and unloaded. And there's a truck parking area to the south of the sorting building. As far as parking goes, customer and employee parking is provided north of the building adjacent to baseline behind a large landscaped area. There's also a city well site on this property that they will be providing to the city, and the city would develop a well in the future if needed. From an access standpoint, there is a driveway at the northwest corner of the site that is anticipated to be a full access driveway, and it is located such that it's designed to be converted to a shared access for both this property as well as the produce company's property in the future when they develop. That would allow for the most efficient access of both properties. There's a secondary access with left turn movements out of the site where they would not be allowed, but everything else would be. And then there's an emergency only access that can get to the site from Palo Verde Road. In regards to landscape screening, I think, which is the primary reason maybe that we're here tonight, there is an 8-foot decorative masonry screen wall that is provided adjacent to Baseline Road and wrapping the corners a distance that was needed to ensure that from the folks on the sidewalk or on the street that you don't really have much of a view of the chain link material. It does transition to an 8-foot vinyl coated chain link fence with privacy slats for the remainder of the site that is in conformance with the development code that allows for the use of chain link in industrial zoning districts so long as it's not used in locations visible from the street. In addition, there is a 30-foot landscape buffer, also per code, along the west property line. Within that landscape buffer, we'll be regularly repeating 36-inch box trees to assist in screening. There's a 60-foot landscape setback along Baseline Road as well to present well from the perspective of the street, and some images that I'll show you in just a second will highlight what that looks like. And those trees also wrap the east corner of the property line to, so whatever outdoor pile storage there is, those trees would block that. So this is a rendering of the site. The top left image is the administration building, basically what you would see from the parking lot of the facility as proposed. The top right is from the intersection of Palo Verde and Baseline. The reason I asked for this is basically this gives you the most oblique angle into the site. If there was outdoor storage proposed, this is the kind of the angle that you would most want to make sure you're screening from. And as you can see there, really the only thing visible above the fence and tree line is a crane that's used for loading and offloading. The bottom left picture is just kind of an elevated aerial looking down into the site. And you can see even from that angle, there's very little that's visible, which is quite different than the Phoenix site, of course, that Mr. Gilbert had showed you the pictures of. And then the material and color palette. Overall, staff finds this to be a very pleasing, aesthetically pleasing design, and we were in support of it. For the site plan, the applicant did, the AIM Recycling applicant did complete all the required notices, did the notice of application, which is how Medema was first made aware of this proposal. Once staff was aware that there was some concern from the adjacent owner, we did try to mediate a solution between the two property owners, but we were not successful. The appellant did complete all required notices for this particular appeal. Industrial uses such as this, recycling centers, are consistent with the desired character for the area, for the employment general plan designation, as well as the existing general commerce zoning on the property. This was the intent, at least dating back to 2007, when the property was initially zoned GC, that the rail corridor here would be developed in an industrial fashion. We don't anticipate any adverse impacts from this site. We believe we've worked through the site plan process from a screening standpoint to complete all of the code requirements, and the site will be a benefit to the city of Buckeye when operational. I do want to point out, just in regard to the adverse impacts that Mr. Gilbert is mentioning that the solid wall would help rectify. Certainly there is no issue in the future if and when that property comes in to develop, that developer would construct their own wall. That's typically what would happen. If they need something for a requirement of code or the federal government, it's usually the developer of that use that provides it, not the adjacent property owner. I do want to point out too that there's no approvals of that proposed agricultural site or facility. Currently, it's a piece of farmland, and the proposed use is consistent with that neighboring property. There's nothing to protect against. Access and internal circulation have all been reviewed. Traffic engineer have signed off on the proposal. The developer of the site AIM will complete the adjacent offsite improvements to Baseline Road, and the site will be served initially by well and septic and converted to city systems when they are brought to this particular portion of the city. Future phases, that other half of the property, will require new submittals, reviews, and approvals in the future. So the signing off on this doesn't approve anything for the remainder of the site. The site plan does comply with in staff's view, the industrial building standards and guidelines in our code. This is a high quality design for an industrial use, and it meets all the very specific requirements for that type of development. No indication, I have not seen anything from the appellant that suggests that the proposed recycling use is going to unusually attract any sort of rodents or pests. As I mentioned, this is pre-shredded materials, usually in containers and bins. There's not a lot of trapped air and gaps in the materials where rats or something would typically live. There's also really no indication that I've seen that suggests those pests that they are concerned about wouldn't be able to scale a wall just as easily as getting through a chain link fence. So with that, Mayor, members of the council, staff's recommendation tonight is to deny the appeal request, affirming the decision of the Planning and Zoning Commission, which is essentially approving the site plan. So with that, do we want to turn it over now to public hearing or answer questions?
I think, Mr. Mayor, I'll leave that to your choice. We can open the public hearing, receive any comments, and then if the council would like to ask questions after that, you can, or we can go ahead and take questions now if you'd like.
Let's do the public hearing first. And so we are in a public hearing. I've got one request to speak card from Ben Graff.
Mayor, members of the council, my name is Ben Graff with the law firm of Quarles & Brady at 2 North Central Avenue, Phoenix, Arizona. Tonight representing American Iron and Metal in regard to our original site plan approval and defense of this appeal. To start, in terms of a further introduction of my client, I know that this council and this city has driven to attract not only domestic but national and international developers and uses, and to bring business to the city of Buckeye. And tonight, represented by my client is Christian Dubois, who has flown in multiple times, but again tonight from Canada. This is a Canadian-based company, flown in from Canada to help defend this appeal after what has been more than a 2-year courtship with the city to locate this perfect site for Ames Recycling Plant. What I'd like to point out that has been pointed out before is they are the owner of this site. Starting in August of 2022, the applicant and their architect started working with this city, working with staff on zoning and use verifications and development standard verifications. And it wasn't until AIM had verified through written confirmation with the city that the recycling use was permitted and that the development standards, including a chain link fence, would be appropriate, that my client closed and purchased the property. And that was in January of 2023. And since that date, we've been working through the site plan approval process. I bring that up to let you know this is not a recently contemplated use, but instead something that has been negotiated and worked with the city for quite some time. As also has been mentioned, Medima's site is an unincorporated county land. Now that doesn't discount their concerns, but it will be pertinent to another point I'd like to make later, in that the use that has been brought to your attention, the packaging use, it doesn't exist today. The annexation they've discussed, there is no application for annexation before this city. This is a projected potential use in the future, and when that comes, I'm sure this city staff would be happy to work for them through their own development standards to protect their site. But AIM Recycling is ready to pull permits within the next couple months, as has been negotiated with city staff. We stand by the timeline that we've provided to the city. And to state before you, as Mr. Gilbert has, that there's been no communication, first and foremost would be to ignore or to negate the very meetings that this city held in their own conference room between Medima and my client. We've had numerous negotiations and discussions within the 4 walls of this building. We thank the city for hosting those, but there has been numerous conversations and discussions between Medima and my client, and not only can I attest to that, but there were numerous members of the city involved in that. Something that I think is very important for you to understand is what Mr. Gilbert is asking the city council to do today is twofold. They're first asking the city council to impose a development standard upon my client, which is not required by city code. So I ask you to consider that very carefully, because we meet every single aspect of the site plan and development standard requirements and have negotiated our partial CMU wall and chain link fence with city staff. Probably most importantly is number two, Mr. Gilbert is asking you to actually usurp the negotiations that he walked away from. This is very important to understand. He's asking you to impose what is about a $500,000 to $600,000 expense, because this is an extremely long wall, okay? This isn't your standard wall. This is a wall that's well over 2,000 square feet. He's asking the city council tonight to impose that requirement and that cost on my client. And here's what I mean when I say he walked away from negotiations. As we approach this deadline for which this appeal needed to be filed, we did propose a compromise. Instead of what you see, which is on the site plan today, the 208 lineal feet with the 1976 foot-long chain link fence, we offered to split the difference, split the costs with Medema, which we felt was an incredibly fair offer considering the wall is being requested on our property and not theirs. So we said, how about we come to a compromise? We come to a private agreement. We will build the full 8-foot CMU wall, and we'll split the cost 50-50. In return, please don't file the appeal so that this doesn't have to go before city council. We waited and waited and waited, and the day before, the Friday before the appeal was filed, Mr. Gilbert called me and said, how about we don't split it, but how about instead your client builds just 50% of the wall and leaves the rest chain link? And you have to wonder, as I think some of you hopefully are, why would you ask that if you needed the full length of the wall? And Mr. Gilbert's response to us was, we're not ready to annex. We're not ready to develop. We're not ready to take on that cost. So please go ahead and build half of the wall we need, and we'll see what happens in the future. Well, I hope you can understand we respectfully rejected their counteroffer, which then I guess led Mr. Gilbert to file this appeal. But we find it incredibly perplexing that they didn't accept the offer to split the wall. So he's actually asking you to impose a finale to our private negotiations, which in my opinion is probably not the place for the city of Buckeye, but that's for your decision this evening. The last thing I'll point out, and Mr. Galika pointed it out beautifully, what they're also asking for you to do is they're asking for us to meet a requirement that they would have for a food packaging plant. It's their food packaging plant on their property, and if their regulations require a wall, then that probably should be done on their property. But I'll close just with two interesting facts. This is Medema's plant in Michigan. It's surrounded by a chain link fence. This is Medema's current site in Surprise, Arizona. It's currently surrounded by a chain link fence. We remain a bit perplexed at the purpose of the request for a CMU wall, and we would ask for the city council tonight to deny the appeal and uphold the site plan approval that was worked on so hard by your very own staff. Appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Graff. Are there any other speaker requests?
There are no additional speakers.
No additional speaker requests. We are going to then close the public hearing, and we'll go to council questions. Anybody from council with a question?
I have a couple questions. Mr. Mayor, before we get to that, and perhaps I neglected to mention it, we probably ought to let Mr. Gilbert go ahead and offer his rebuttal.
Okay.
We could shut the hearing down, and then you can ask your questions. I apologize for getting that.
Mr. Gilbert.
Thank you. As you can well imagine, I do have several things of importance by way of rebuttal. First of all, I want to make it very clear, we have no bones to pick with your staff. They have been terrific. But in fact, they were so terrific, we couldn't get Ames to sit down and meet with us. So we called your staff and asked them to set up a meeting because Ames wouldn't meet with us and they didn't keep the commitment they said when they would get back to us. So we're happy with your staff. I just wanted to make sure that you didn't operate under a false predicate there. Basically, what we're trying to do is contain the uses. Now, I agree that the project as currently designed may not have all those deleterious piles of garbage and so on that were in the recycling facility in McDowell. But remember, almost a third of this site hasn't been designated. They have no plans for it. So how do we know that they're not going to do that on the next site? 1/3, or my guess is half, I may be off a little bit, but at least half of that site hasn't been designated for use. So there's no commitment to restrict that site and to do something different on that site than what they did on the McDowell site. We still have outdoor storage on the site, and it can be up to, I think, 15 feet. That's the height of this, probably the height of this room. So we're still going to have things stacked up. They showed you that very nice looking building. We acknowledge that, but they don't talk about the outdoor storage that's going on behind that building. We have no quarrel with that building. We like it. But that doesn't address the fact that there's outdoor storage behind it, and it can go as high as 15 feet. So that's a real concern for us. Now, the point that was made is, why doesn't Minema come in and build the wall on their own site if they need it? The fact is, they are the ones that are proposing a use that we consider to be extremely deleterious to our site. And under your ordinance is designed, the site plan process, to protect the adjacent site. It's therefore their responsibility, if they're going to bring in a very intense industrial site, and that's what this is, then they ought to have the responsibility to install and pay for that wall. Now, it's interesting, they spent 2 years working with a staff, and in that 2 years, they only reached out to us once and had a meeting with us on May 17th, and then didn't meet with us again for 3 months. We had to, and pardon the repetition here, but to even get a copy of their site plan, we had to file a public records request. This is not a company that's trying to do their duty to reach out and work with the adjacent neighbors. They just haven't been a good neighbor in this case. And all we're asking for is that they protect us from a use that they are bringing in that's very deleterious to our project. I was really interested. You know that photo they showed you that they said was one of our plants? It wasn't. You don't know what plant that is, but it wasn't ours. So they're showing you a photo that had a chain link fence around it for a plant that wasn't ours. Secondly, they also point out, correctly so, that in Surprise, we don't have a chain link fence. We don't have a CMU wall. We have a chain link fence around the facility in Surprise. But why? Because there we're not adjacent to an intense industrial use. Big difference. So when that plant went in, we didn't need a CMU wall. So the two instances they're proposing to you tonight that somewhat derogate. Now that orange light means I only have 5 more minutes? Is that, sorry. So what they're proposing to you is basically not apropos to the situation here, and again showing a photograph of a building that isn't even ours is a concern. Now, they did propose a compromise. They suggested that we split the cost of the wall. I'll finish with this point here. I know my place here. They suggest, well, we offered them a compromise to split the cost of the wall. Well, why didn't we agree with that? Because they're causing the problem. They should be the ones to pay for the wall. But we didn't stop there. We didn't want to have the expense of putting in a wall before our facility packaging plant was built. And so we wanted to put the wall in if we had to go along with that compromise at a subsequent time. We didn't want to have to put it in now before our facility was built. So we think that coming back to your ordinance, which says your ordinance is designed through the site plan process to protect adjacent uses, that, I submit, has not been done in this case. And that it should not be our responsibility to pay for the CMU wall that we need, because they are the ones that are causing the problem, not us. Thank you. Be happy to answer any questions that you have. And for a lawyer that's paid by the word, I did pretty good on you.
You didn't do too bad, that's right. Okay, I think, Councilman Yonker, you had some questions. Let's go to council questions.
Okay, we are able to ask both the Ken and the applicant questions, correct? Just for clearance for procedural issues.
Yes, sir.
So I guess I'll start with Mr. Glinka. It was brought up a point of getting a copy of the site plan. Is it our typical best practice to share a site plan of a project that comes in with the neighbors without being requested?
Councilmember, without being requested, just
Correct.
proactively sending it out?
Is it our best practice to say, hey, this is going next to your facility, we're gonna send you this site plan, what do you think? Is that followed through in the community outreach meeting?
Yeah, so typically how that works is with the notice of application, sometimes the site plan will, a very small copy that usually you can't read because nobody's printing out the 24 by 36s, would be included in that packet. But in a lot of cases, there's just contact information. If you want to know more information, call us and we'll provide that to you. So the city then, if the owner of an adjacent property contacts us, we do need to go through the public records request process, but it's a simple, free process to go through that, and it's usually a day or two.
So our standard procedure was followed?
Yes.
That's what yes, that's where I was trying to get the question. Also, the use follows the use for this site in that area, though it is currently an heavily ag area. Does this use for that AIM is going to use this property for? Does it follow our general plan with what we have planned for the future?
Yes, Mayor, Councilmember Yonker, yes, the property is designated as employment in the general plan, which is the city's general plan designation to accommodate light industrial uses and heavy industrial uses if separated from residential property. So yes, the general plan, it's consistent with that. And the zoning, which has actually been on the property longer than the general plan designation, general commerce, is an industrial zoning district that allows the use also. So yes, it's consistent.
I'm going to assume that use is put within that area mostly because of the rail access. Would that be a correct assumption?
Yeah, I think the rail access is definitely a primary reason that this site is good for it. I think the other is certainly there will be some noise generated from moving metal around, and it's a location without very much residential existing in the area, and certainly no residential in proximity planned in the area. So from those two perspectives, it's an ideal location as far as staff's concerned.
Okay, I think that's all I have for you, Mr. Glinka. And I guess my next series of questions that I have on it would be, I'm a little bit confused on what we are currently looking at in that particular site as of right now today. We don't have any site plan or anything like that, correct? We don't have any, we've not got any current, anything into the county or anything in the city to do anything with other than agricultural use, correct?
Mr. Mayor, may I answer that question? As I indicated, we bought the site 5 years ago with the intent to bring a packaging plant. We have not submitted any plans, but that is our intent, and that's why we bought the site.
Okay,
So we're intending to come. We've told you that we have to close our surprise packaging plant down, and this is the site we're going to bring it to.
Okay, and I appreciate that, but that doesn't answer my question. My question was, what is it being used currently as? It's currently in agriculture, correct?
We're growing radishes, that's correct.
Now, that leads to my next question that I'm also a little bit confused on. Because in the hearing with the planning and zoning, it was stated that it was cantaloupes. So if we switch from cantaloupes to radishes, and when I drive past this property, it looks like it is alfalfa to me. So what, do we know what you're growing in that, or do we have a little bit of confusion about what's actually on the site?
My understanding is that it's radishes, but we have the man that can answer that question. Is it radishes, Todd?
Councilman, that piece of ground is in rotation right now. It is not in radishes right now. It's in alfalfa.
Okay, so it is currently alfalfa, and a big section of the southern end of that is also, has palm trees on it, correct? That will be harvested at a later date for somebody's landscaping or what have you. Is that correct? Okay. So that's, I was curious about where all that different information was coming about what was actually there currently. My next question would be, we've talked a lot about that really the reason is for the rodent infestation possibilities and things of that nature. Is there any direct FDA requirement or whoever your governing body is that says you need a CMU wall around any in particular packing plant? Is there like a code that says this is X is required, or is it just you have a list of making sure that you don't have any infestations regardless of your neighbors or anything like that? Does that burden always ultimately falls on the packing plant itself, correct?
We cannot point to a specific federal requirement that we have to have a CMU wall. What we can point out, and I quoted the provision in my presentation, is that the rating agency that comes and does the audits for our facility says basically that we can't have rodents, pests, and other potential contaminants. And we don't feel, that's our business. We're in the industry. We wouldn't have gotten to this much trouble if we didn't have a genuine and sincere fear that without a CMU wall, we would have rodents coming across. And the comment was made before, well, rodents won't go through a CMU wall, but they also won't go through a chain link fence. That is not vindicated by our experience. That's why we're so concerned.
Okay. You go ahead.
Councilman Yonker, as far as rodents and pests that get in like that, it's an automatic fail when we have facilities that are there. That's the concern there. Now, is a CMU wall far superior to a chain link? By far. Is it the complete total solution? Never is, but it's a far sight better than a chain link fence. Now, along with it, much has been said about the pests. But along with that chain link fence comes debris that comes through there and trash. That is a very significant thing to us, along with the rodent issues. And along with it, a CMU wall, why are they constructed around all the facilities that are put up, all the commercial and industrial buildings? And it's an aesthetics thing. It is also a visual barrier. And here again, too, we go back to the point that AIM is coming in and causing the impediment. We're just saying this goes up. It's not ideal, but it goes a long ways towards fixing that impediment. Like we said, we're not going to stand in the way, but at the same time, they're the ones causing it. They should be the ones bearing the financial burden.
Okay. And that kind of answers my next question about, the offer was made of sharing costs in the wall. So if there's not any actual requirement from your governing body that comes and inspects, and forgive me for not knowing who it is, but somebody comes and inspects you on an annual basis or biannual, whatever it happens to be, you're not going to be required by the best practices to do that CMU wall around your property from your governing body. Is that correct? I'm still making sure that I'm hammering that home a little bit.
Mia is our food safety manager. She knows all the intricacies.
Yeah, we spoke.
Hello. Okay. My name is Mia Mitchell. I'm the food safety manager for Meet 'em Up Produce. We do have annual inspections. There is nothing in federal regulation or our Primus GFS guidelines that tell us that we need specifically a CMU wall. They just say that we have to do our own risk assessments and implement the necessary mitigation measures to prevent pest intrusion into our facility.
Okay, that's a very good point that you bring up on that. Within that assessment and your risk assessment of the pests and stuff that would come within your facility, can you give me an idea within that assessment what your percentage of higher risk that you're going to have based off of lack of a CMU wall along this western border when you take into consideration that just to the south is Western Milling, which is, you know, a haven for the pests that we're talking about. I know that we also have the issue of trash and things of that nature, but can you tell me what you expect to have a higher amount of burden on your assessment of based off of just this 2,000 feet of wall?
We definitely expect to have more of a burden immediately adjacent to a recycling facility if it is anything like the two facilities that we saw downtown. I mean, with the amount of trash and debris that's on the ground, both in piles and not in piles or not in bins, we saw a lot of debris, which allows for a lot of pest harborage. Yes, and there will be outdoor storage.
Okay, and what, in that assessment, because you guys are a professional company, within that assessment, how does it differ from your risks that are coming up from the south being the Western Milling and then from the north being the Stoats Dairy and the water retention basins that are just across the street?
Well, the Stoats Dairy is a half a mile from our property.
Actually, the water retention basin is on the north side of Baseline Road, which is be about maybe 25 or 30 yards from your property line.
Okay. Well, I mean, in that case, we'd have to do our own risk assessments for those as well. But the buffer zone is obviously greater. The larger the buffer zone we have, less mitigation measures we have to take. So it depends. If we're talking about immediately adjacent to our property, then we have to take more severe or more intense mitigation measures.
Okay, thank you.
Same with Western Milling. It's going to be on the opposite side of the property from where we intend to put our processing facility.
So you're saying it'll be a further distance, so that's been somewhat contemplated?
Right.
Okay, okay, thank you. The last point that I have in question, it was based off of our previous conversations that we had within the one where we met together, AIM, the AIM team, and the Medina team. I'm sorry if I pronounced your last name wrong. I don't mean to.
That's okay.
This whole problem, it was offered for it to sunset and go away if you were able to get a rail spur access to your property. Can you explain to me how that really mitigates the trash and the rodents and how that makes everything okay with you guys and completely not pull all of your disapproval of this project?
Sure, that's very, very easy to explain. Basically, it's a balancing of advantages. If we could have rail access, particularly on a shared rail with the Ames recycling plant, which they turned down incidentally, then that is a tremendous boost to us from an economic point of view. That allows us then, if we had to put our own wall in, we could afford to do it under those circumstances because we got a significant and major advantage from the rail access. It didn't mitigate or derogate in any way from the fact that we preferred the CMU wall. But if we could get that other, then that gave us a tremendous economic advantage. And that's why we were willing, in the spirit of compromise, to make that offer.
Okay, and in the same spirit of compromise, in the same spirit of clarification on that, it's not 100% up to AIM whether you can extend that rail spur or not, correct? You get to deal with the juggernaut that is a rail company as well, which is a very heavy lift.
Yeah, the juggernaut would be a euphemism. I'm very aware of the fact. I'm dealing with Union Pacific now on another case, and we felt that the chances were good that we could convince Union Pacific based on my other negotiation, which I'm currently engaging in on another project. So that's why. It was a risk.
Okay. So it was just the cost advantage that you guys were weighing it. It really had nothing to do with the eventual safety. It just had just been more of a cost analysis basis, correct?
Just made more, it was such an advantage to us to have that rail.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's all I have for now.
Thank you, Councilman. Vice Mayor.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Gilbert, I want to clarify something that you said, that our current code says that they need to protect adjacent uses. Is that correct?
That's correct. Would you like me to, give me a minute, I'll show it back up on the screen. There, it's the indented paragraph.
Right. So it says nothing about protecting future uses, correct?
Well, it does not, but it says protecting adjacent uses.
Okay, so
So if you were to say that only applied to current uses, there would be not much reason to have advanced planning. Got to take into account what's going to come there as well.
right, and
I think that's part of the ordinance.
that's
Sorry, I didn't mean
the point I'm trying to make is that understand that, and I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher your name again, Medema? Is that close enough? Sorry.
That'll do.
My apologies. That you have intention of putting a packaging plant on this property, but have not taken any active steps, either with the city or with the county, to solidify that. Right now, it's an aspiration. Is that correct? Am I correct in assuming that?
You're correct in that it's an aspiration, but as I've said several times in my presentation, we bought the property with the intent of putting the packaging plant there. And that's a reality for us because we're going to have to shut down the packaging plant we have in Surprise. So we do need to relocate, and this is the site we chose.
Understand and appreciate, and thank you for considering Buckeye for that. But you've not taken any active steps in that direction other than purchasing this property 5 years ago.
We have not, except I will say that we're watching the situation in Surprise very carefully.
Understand. Aspiration is not a bad thing.
Thank you.
It's not, absolutely not.
Thank you. We feel the same way.
But I think, what we're being asked as a council is to adjudicate this appeal. And what we have to go to is what our code says. And right now, this project was approved with the general intent, and I'm quoting here, to encourage high-quality design appropriate for industrial uses while promoting economic development, protecting adjacent uses, and fostering a positive image for the community. The adjacent use to Ames property is agriculture. Right now, you're growing alfalfa on it. Rotational crops, as I understand. You're not packaging anything at this point. So I really having a hard time getting to where AIM should be building this wall, either fully or partially, to protect your alfalfa field. If at some point in the future you decide that you're going to annex into the city and you're going to move forward with a packaging plant, I think that's the appropriate time to talk with your neighbor about what kind of barrier can be provided between their property and yours. Right now, it's completely, it's aspirational. You can't think of another adjective to use right there, but please convince me why that wall needs to be built now and not at a point at the point where you're building your packaging facility.
Mayor and Mr. Vice Mayor, you are absolutely right. You don't need that wall right now. But this very hearing and this very negotiation vindicates very powerfully why we need to do it now. If they're not willing to do it now, how willing are they going to be 4 years from now when we come in and say, hey, we need you to build a wall? I think it's naive to assume that we're going to be able to be successful whatsoever 5 years or 4 years whenever we build the packaging plant to get them to put in a wall when they're not even willing to do it now.
Well, I think the wall, as I understand it, the responsibility for the wall is yours, not theirs. Because
I strongly disagree with that.
Well,
They're causing the problem, they should solve it.
they're not, again, I'm going back to protecting adjacent use. It's an alfalfa field right now. So as they build their facility, a chain link fence is protecting your alfalfa field. So when you build a packaging facility, it's incumbent upon you to protect adjacent use, which is in their direction. So I think timing is everything here. You know, I think if you'd come forward and you had annexation in progress, and if you had plans and a timeline for your packaging facility, this would be a much different conversation. Right now, we think we're going to build this at some point when we have to move out of Surprise. And because we're going to do this, we're going to require AIM to build that wall for us. I mean, they're ready to turn dirt. You guys are turning dirt for another reason, but they're ready to build their facility. You're nowhere close to that at this point.
It would be simply redundant for me to repeat my
I understand.
position on that.
I understand completely.
I disagree with that, but I've made my piece.
That's why we're here.
It hasn't convinced you, and I suspect another 10 minutes won't convince you.
No, and you know, as we were having this conversation in the materials I read ahead of time, you know, a Robert Frost poem kept popping into my head. It's the one about mending fences, and the last line in that poem is good fences make good neighbors. And I think this is a great opportunity for neighbors to get together and work something out. So with that, Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Council Member Hess.
My question's for you, Ken. What current uses are allowed under our GZ?
It's too long of a list to probably recite, but it's everything from, enclosed light manufacturing to warehousing and distribution, to heavier industrial uses, petroleum refineries, pretty much almost any sort of industrial type of use you can think of is allowed in the GC district.
What is excluded? It's easier.
Commercial and residential uses, certain commercial and residential uses. This is really intended to be an industrial zone. Specific ones, certain retail types of uses, certain restaurant types of uses. All residential uses are not allowed in GC. So it's really a kind of a single focus type of district.
And it can go as heavy as anything.
Correct, yeah, it is an obsolete district, meaning that we don't rezone properties to it anymore. Currently, our code has an I-1 and an I-2 district. I-1 being light industrial, I-2 being heavy industrial. GC is basically I-1 and I-2 put together, allowing for the full gamut of industrial.
So there's nothing from precluding this. I guess right now we're seeing a proposal for a specific use, but there's nothing stopping them from changing it when they add on. As long as it's got a GZ zoning, it can pretty much do anything it wants.
Mayor, council member, Yes and no. Yes, they can expand the facility in the future by going through our processes again, the site plan process. But at that time, if there's a more intense use proposed, if there's a different type of character to the use, if there's other concerns that are raised at that time that are different from what we're looking at today, staff can and will address those. Maybe at that time, if there is something proposed that staff does feel a solid wall is better equipped to handle, we would require it at that time. Maybe it's a taller wall, maybe it's additional landscaping. All those types of things would be back on the table when they propose anything beyond what you're seeing today.
With some of our other the GZ zoning throughout the city of Buckeye, have we asked most of them to do a CMU wall? Is it a mixed bag? I mean, when I look at Five Below or Funko, it looks like they have a CMU, the entire facility. So I'm just curious how, when we apply, you must have it and when you don't have to have it.
Yeah, Mayor, Councilmember Hess, it's purely based on locational kind of criteria. If it's visible from adjacent properties, and particularly the Five Below and Funko, nearby residential on some sides, you can't really hide those property lines from the perspective of those neighbors and streets. Where in this case, we anticipate the adjacent property in the future to develop with a similar industrial type of use. So there's not the need to make it look as pretty from the adjacent property. We're more concerned with what the appearance looks like from the street, and the proposal, you basically, unless you're got 20/80 vision or whatever the good vision is, from the street you will notice the solid wall, and when it transitions far enough away from the street, it'll just be a blur at that point.
What are the other uses around there, like for a planning map? I guess we're assuming that everybody's going to be okay with looking at trash all the time on Bayside. I'm not being facetious. I'm just really asking a question that we're assuming everybody's okay with it.
Right here. So I think these perspectives give you a sense of what surrounding properties would be able to see. I think it's a industrial site. Certainly, it's not something that's commercial in character, like a shopping center, or certainly not residential. So you're going to see certain things like the cranes, but primarily you're going to see landscaping, wall from the perspective of the street, even from the adjacent site. They are providing the slatted chain link, so it's not see-through. It looks solid. It's obviously not, but.
I guess I'm asking if there was just a land use map.
Yeah.
To what? Yeah, I thought there was.
Yeah, that's where I was going, and then I got
I don't know
distracted.
how far it went out. So, thank you.
So you can see currently all of the surrounding properties are essentially agricultural. There's the Saddle Mountain Dairy to the southeast of the site, Western Milling to the southwest of the site, Stoats Farms up to the north. Everything else is pretty much just farm field.
Can you tell me what's in the? So they're kind of like an L. What is it zoned? The part that slides into the L. That would make
the portion near Palo Verde, kind of the gap.
Mm-hmm.
That is the map on the right is showing unincorporated Maricopa County. All of these properties in the county are currently zoned rural.
It's all still rural.
Yes.
Okay. And then the red on the other side, is that our employment?
No, the red is general commerce, GC zoning,
still?
just like this property. Those are incorporated, yep.
But in the general plan, do we have a more defined use?
We have, I don't know why it's not in here. I thought I had that slide. I'll just make sure it's not at the The whole corridor, basically the rail corridor south of Baseline, is the employment designation where, for properties adjacent to the railroad track. So the expectation is industrial development in that whole corridor.
So is that fair to say it's similar to Southern, where we have Walmart, Ross, very similar to that? And do they have any CMUs or chain link? What did we use as a standard right there?
Yeah, that's a good question. Mayor, council member, Walmart has a chain link fence around the property. Ross has the world's biggest berming around the property. And on the inside of the berming, there's chain link, but they provide the berming so you can't see the chain link. So that's the kind of the purpose of that. So there's multiple ways to kind of skin the cat.
Okay. And then it does look like there is required landscaping as a buffer next to the chain link fence, I think is what I saw.
Yes, that is correct. I'm trying to just pull up the, so that green strip there along the west property line, that's a 30-foot wide landscape buffer where there will be repeating 36-inch box, so larger types of trees every 25 feet, I believe.
How is that enforced after the fact? I know we asked that from a lot of people, but if there's a big storm and half of them get taken out, how do we enforce that back in from a perspective of screening?
Yep. That's a good question. We do have a code provision that says if any landscaping is damaged or removed, the city has the ability to use, through code enforcement means, to require the property owner to reinstall that landscaping to basically match what was previously there.
Okay, so there is an enforcement of some sort of just
It's
keep
available,
that.
the option, yeah. If you notice something, you can always let us know and we can take care of that.
It's hard to project what this will look like in 5, 10, 15 years. I don't love the idea that you can just see so much from, like their point, it's 2,000 square feet, lineal, not square. Thank you, fact checker. But it's the railroad to the south, the dairy to the north, employment to the east, rural to the.
Yeah, in the future, really, all sides are employment. When all those agricultural uses redevelop or develop, that entire, basically everything on that aerial. Basically everything on this aerial is anticipated, at least north of the canal, is anticipated to be future employment or industrial types of uses.
In the Phoenix scenario, just uses, say, not exactly the plant per se, is that how it, I'm sure a couple of those places came in, recycling plants and so forth, and then people built around it. Is that pretty typical there too? And I know that's probably going out of your city, your purview, but.
Yeah, I don't know the history of the Phoenix AIM location, other than I've heard from the AIM folks that they acquired that site from a different company who previously had developed it. I do want to say we do have some protection in the approval, in the applicant's narrative. They do mention no shredding operations, crushing operations will ever occur on this site, so they do commit in the future to not including some of that heavier industrial use on the property as well.
Yeah, and we're just a very windy city, especially in that area where there's nothing buffering, so it could be the cleanest plant ever. It's just, it's windy, it's gonna catch everything, and so I'm just kind of curious, maybe this is a better question for Ames, is what is your standard for kind of maintaining the property, I guess, for lack of better word. I don't.
Why don't we have, so we don't have dueling microphones over, why don't we have you all sit down until we have another question for you guys, and we'll let
I'll be wrapping up with
Ben
this.
come up and answer. Thank you.
See the future, but I'm just, again, anything being constructed or anything around here, you just gather it all, it seems.
Yeah, Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Hess, appreciate the question and the opportunity to address that question. I appreciate that Ken pointed out the Phoenix site, the pictures that you saw, that is an inherited site, meaning we purchased that. We're in the process of improving and basically cleaning up that site. That's not a ground-up site like what's being proposed here. This is kind of going to be the jewel of American iron and metal from the ground up. So our site will be kept incredibly clean. We have internal circulation that wouldn't allow for debris. The debris would inhibit, random debris inhibits cars, tracking internal movement of metals. The piles are incredibly organized. The fencing is fully slatted, so it is an opaque fence, and the slatting does prevent if there was some kind of debris that could be pushed by the wind. Again, please keep in mind this is a metal recycling plant. Our items really don't move in the wind, but should there be anything like that, the metal slatting or the plastic slatting in the metal fencing also prevents that. So we keep the sites incredibly clean, and we also keep, just to kind of anticipate another potential question, we keep all of that separated from other circulation. And it is true, we are completely, in essence, by our site plan approval, prohibited from having the type of crushing or scraping that would have occurred on the other side.
Right, Mayor, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilman Eustis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe Councilmember Yonker and Vice Mayor Goodman and Council Lady have pretty much asked most of the scribbling I have down here. And you just answered the one for me, that there would not be any petroleum products from gas tanks or from anything else being crushed on the property, so that we wouldn't have an issue with the fire department. So that was part of it. How many employees do they estimate to have out there?
Mayor, members of the council, we estimate about 45 to 50 for the phase one operation.
And
We
hours
have
of
potential for-
operation?
Yeah, we have potential for future phases, but the site plan before you is for phase one.
Hours of operation for that?
The hours of operation are 7 days a week, and we can have the ability to operate into the evening. But again, with the perspective that this is a site that's going to be surrounded by industrial uses.
And your control on the dust and everything that's going to be stirred up?
Absolutely. We're under strict Arizona Department of Environmental Quality and local dust control requirements. So, for example, anywhere where there be internal circulation is either paved or treated with decomposed granite, things like that.
I ask you this question without asking the other side, but would you still be at all interested in splitting the cost of that wall if it would ever come to that?
We explained to Mr. Gilbert that if he continued with his appeals and increased my client's legal fees, it was going to become increasingly difficult to come to a compromise. I wouldn't say the door's closed on that, but again, it's a private agreement that we need to work out. But it's gotten to a point where we're here at City Council on a site plan approval. My client continues to incur legal fees. I want to be honest with the answer to the question. They've put us in a very tough position.
And it also costs to fly down from Canada, correct?
Correct.
Okay. What I am looking at is, you may or may not be willing to look at that, but you or I do not know for sure if and when the other facility would ever be built, if it's going to be built and when it'll be built. And I guess my ask would be, would you reconsider it possibly at that time? Would you contract to something that might be willing to say, hey, if and when you build your plant next door, we'll split the wall with you 50-50? Would that be anything you would even consider further down the road? 3 years, 4 years, 5 years?
Sure. Mayor, members of the council, we want to be good neighbors. I think mending fences and the Robert Frost quote is maybe a good lesson for the evening. We want to maintain good relationship with our neighbors and move things forward. We'll be open to those discussions. I certainly can't commit on the record to splitting the fence in the future, but again, I won't close the door to that discussion tonight.
Of course, my fence never cost $500,000, but when I moved in, my neighbor and I, as normal neighbors, said, figure out where the line is and we'll build the fence and split the cost. So something like that would, to me at least, try to seem to make some sense if it would still be on the table. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councilman Eustis. Councilmember Guy, do you have any questions?
No questions at this time. Might have been asked and answered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Ken, can you put back up the recommendation from, and then there's, I think I understand, and this is probably where Andrew, you come in. There's, I think, two choices that we can make. One is, or maybe there's three, denying the appeal and affirming the decision of the Planning and Zoning Commission to approve the site plan that's as it's written right there. We can accept the appeal, and I guess that then goes back to Andrew, the Planning and Zoning Commission, or offer some other route, I guess, as number three. That's basically our three options.
Mr. Mayor, I think your other route description is a good way to express that the council has no real constraints in the approach that you take on this. The only constraints that you have that I would remind you of is the requirements for the site plan approval and the exactions as they were that are built into your code, already mentioned by the site plan holder earlier in the presentation. If you want a little more background on that comment, we'll probably have to take a moment and pop into e-session, but just confirming you do have flexibility in your remedy. It is not just either deny or approve. You also have other options as well.
Okay. I don't know if, Council, I think you're understanding the same that I don't believe we need a e-session to go in and talk about our options here. Do we have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to deny the appeal on behalf of Median Produce and uphold the action of our Planning and Zoning Committee.
Okay, I have a motion made. You press the magic button there, Mr. Yonker, if you would.
Mr. Mayor, I'll second that motion.
I have a second verbally by Eustis, but on the machine by Goodman.
Faster finger.
So we'll make that from Vice Mayor Goodman. And we'll go to the vote now. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Vote on the machine. Councilmember Guy, can you tell us how you vote?
Aye.
Okay. All right, we're unanimous for denying the appeal. Okay, thank you all. We'll move on to item 6B. Council to hold a public hearing, take action on ordinance number 24-24, approving an amendment to the Desert Creek Community Master Plan as described in case number PLZZ-23-00014. And we're going to have Mr. Bart Wingart. You're presenting. Bart, you're on.
Good to see you again. Before you tonight is the Desert Creek. It's a major CMP amendment and a development agreement. Just a location map. This is located in the western portion of the city. It is about 2,234 acres. It is bounded by Roosevelt Street alignment to the north, 315th Avenue to the east, Rozier Road to the south, and the Hassayampa River to the west. You'll notice that part of the CMP crosses over north of the Interstate 10. The general plan and zoning for this, the general plan land use and zoning will not be modified because this item is located within the master plan community land use. and the Planned Community Zoning District, both designations are intended for CMPs such as proposed. Just to give you an idea of what's going on, the northern 930 acres is the focus of the CMP. And this is to address the land uses of that. The current land uses within the predominantly residential use, it is commercial and employment and primarily residential. Originally wanting complete flexibility is shown here, allowing anything from industrial down to residential. Staff was very uncomfortable with that. We felt that there was no kind of predictability, no balance of uses in this area. So what we worked with the applicant to come up with a pod concept for this property, for this 930 acres. And the pod concept will provide predictability and a balance of uses. And there will be 6 pods within here. And we have a series of items related to this. All pods are separated with an aggregate distance of 150 feet. And this can be roads, this can be trails, this can be a combination of that. We also have a utility corridor that splits that. By guiding development, once a pod has a use in it, the entire pod will be that use, with some exceptions that we'll get into on here. So commercial uses are complementary to both residential and employment and will be allowed in any pod. A minimum of 20% of the pods must contain residential uses, and we're talking about the acreage. So, you know, we're not counting the commercial that might be within that pod, but we're talking acreage of the entire area. 25% would be residential. And to alleviate the concerns over apartment farms, the maximum density for a residential pod is 8 dwelling units per acre, and that's spread over a whole pod. So you might have a higher density and a lower density within that pod. Next, there was discussion with the...
Sorry, Bart, sorry to throw you off. That doesn't mean that you can't have a very high-dense apartment complex. It just means you can't do that across the entire pod.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yes, sir, ma'am.
thank you.
The vehicle circulation was modified somewhat, and I'd like to also point out that the applicant worked with the adjacent, formerly known as Cipriani, to make sure that these roadways they align in form and function. And you can see those connections that will go off to the east towards the Cipriani property. Now, outside of the 930 acres to the north, they are making additions to the parks and open space on here. And I'd like to point out that the trails in here match the Parks and Trails master plan of the city. But the one thing that I really would like to point out is the green line along the Hassayampa River. We're only required to do a 35-foot easement for a trail in this area. The applicant has chosen to provide a 250-foot wide easement, public easement for our trail inventory. And we're excited to add that to our inventory of the city and feel like the Hassayampa River trail will be one of the major trails in this area. All notifications were completed by Arizona state law. We did have a neighborhood meeting on January 31st. 8 to 10 people did attend. They had no issues with the project. It was more curiosity. It was mostly adjacent landowners wanting to know what was going on, but there was no opposition. We received no opposition through the mail or through email. When it comes to water and wastewater, as per the previous agreement, they're going to have to come up with their own solution for this. And they will be working with our water department to create that as this pod concept develops. Also part of this is the updated development agreement. You know, it's a minor minor issues with the development agreement, ownership transfers, the school district has changed since this has been put in. Fire requirements are brought up to current standards. This project will be part of a regional solution to provide the I-10 interchange. And as I said before, the water, wastewater would have to be through their own, they would have to develop their own solution, and hopefully they'll work with the adjacent CMPs to rectify that. Staff recommends the mayor and city council hold a public hearing and approve ordinance 2424 for this case, subject to conditions A through NN. And while that concludes my presentation, the applicant is here and would like to give a presentation, if that's approved by the mayor.
I don't know. We'll see how many slides he has. Let's count the number of slides first, and then.
49.
Yeah, Councilmember Hess, go ahead.
Bart, I just want to clarify, you said that this will help develop the I-10 interchange?
This will be part of a regional solution.
And how's that?
Well, when it comes to time, that all the projects around this would all have to contribute. You know, through our traffic program, I can probably refer to our traffic engineer if.
So is it any which way that the pods trigger, any of them will help build the interchange, or?
Correct.
Okay, I wanted to make sure I understood that. Thank you.
Mayor,
Mr. Jones.
members of the City Council, Kurt Jones and Tiffany and Bosco, we're at 2525 East Camelback Road in Phoenix. I'm here with Shane Ross, who's the attorney, helped with the development agreement. I don't have to do a presentation. Bart did a great job. We're looking for some land use flexibility on that area north of Yuma. If you look at that, the one section that's north of I-10, I think I've explained over and over that that is a big drainage area. It's probably not going to develop unless someone does some significant work on the entire area drainage-wise. So again, looking for some land use flexibility, work with staff to come up with the pod concept that has some checks and balances in there. I think we've come up with a great solution, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Jones. Let's see. We need to have a public hearing on this, so we'll open up the public hearing. I have no speaker request cards for this one specific. Am I missing any? None other. Anybody from the public wishing to speak? Seeing none, we will close the public hearing. And any questions from council?
Mr. Mayor, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Bart, in this section that is to the north with all the different uses, what is not allowed in there? Because it seems like it's a kitchen sink. You know, like we let everything kind of, we don't know what we're going to do with our hands, but we want to be able to do whatever it is when we get there. So I'm looking for some clarification on what wouldn't be allowed.
Mayor, Councilman, this pretty much covers the gamut of what can be allowed in here, from industrial down to residential.
Even I-1 and I-2? Is that what you're?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So it's a blank check, as it were.
I would say that the original proposal was a blank check. This, with the pod concept, is going to give us some control and some predictability with that.
So it's got the numbers filled out on the check, just not signed.
Yeah, good way of putting it. Yes. Well, absolutely.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Adam Copeland here. Okay, I would like to maybe add a little more to just some clarification on that. Heavy industrial uses, IT uses, are not allowed on this site. It's only for light industrial uses that are allowed in our development code, business park uses, commercial uses, as well as the mix of residential. I did want to add one more comment. I think before, the applicant was actually looking at all of Desert Creek, the 2,000 plus acres for an employment corridor. So we had quite a bit of collaboration over the last year with the goal of mixing the uses, so it's not a predominant, all employment use. So the applicant worked with staff and agreed north of Yuma would kind of be that cutoff. But even north of Yuma, we wanted to see a mix in that area as well. As Bart mentioned, it's you have to have at least 25% of uses that are that non-industrial land use. So I wanted to kind of clarify some of the history on that. Oops, that may better explain where we landed with the project from over the last year.
Okay. So we've done a pretty good job polishing it up.
Yeah, we're really excited. I think much of the feedback we received from council, we've had several workshops with council. We've heard a lot of feedback regarding, let's challenge the development community to provide some type of mix of uses, buffering between uses. We don't want to see, industrial next to residential. And so with the pod concept, the way that site is set up is you do have those natural buffers, the power line corridors, you have the major arterial roads, that you're not going to have a residential community right next to an industrial project. So the pod concept separates it out and gives that guarantee for staff that makes us more comfortable, and it adds that predictability that when it does come in, we have those protections. So we thought that was creative, and was somewhat in line with trying to find a way to mix those large-scale employment centers with those supportive uses, so it's not predominant all industrial.
I guess my next question is for Mr. Jones. The current ownership, are they looking, is their intent to develop it themselves, or are they getting it market ready to find the developer to go in and do the work? So they're looking for as marketable a piece of property as they can possibly have with all the uses, so they don't limit their availability of buyers. Is that what they're doing, or are they actually going to move forward as the current ownership?
Mayor and Councilman Yonker, this would be that first step in getting a land use sort of plan associated to that area north of Yuma Road. As Adam and Bart have explained, basically, there's a set of uses for, if we went to employment in one pod, there's a set of uses, there's no blank check, it's a set of uses that says, and basically aligns with the city's light industrial zoning. If we went commercial with an outlet mall, then it would be mostly commercial that could go in that area. Commercial is also allowed in the residential pod to support the residential and the employment. To answer your question, I think this is the first step for our majority property owner and a couple of minor owners to market this property as a potential economic development property along the I-10 corridor in the city of Buckeye. That's the first step. If the pod concept allows some of the pods to go into an industrial with some checks and balances, that some residential mixed use have to occur. So they will start marketing basically the site to large users across the country, across the world, to say that we've got a larger concentration of land along a freeway interchange, a future freeway interchange in Buckeye, Arizona. What say you? And then they start that marketing. This is that first step.
So I guess you're saying it's not a blank check, but I'm having difficulty seeing how it's not, because I feel like we're giving you majority of our uses just open, and then you go and find your buyer, which is a great business proposition for the property owner, and I respect it. But it also seems like we don't really have a plan, and we don't have any intention of what we're actually going to do. We're going to go find, and we're going to make it fit within those uses. It just feels like it's a little more of a broader stroke than we normally do. I mean, am I characterizing that wrong, Adam? I mean,
Councilman Yonker, members of the council, I think many of our master plan communities, you'll have some direction on focusing certain uses in a particular area, but the word like commercial could mean 200 different types of commercial uses: offices, retail, hospitality, kind of falls within that category. But it's fairly common in some of these larger areas that you don't have that level of detail. In some cases, we have end users that may come in and actually be part of the process. So if a large 400-acre user comes in, that's part of a CMP process similar to this one. That's also something that we've seen here, but it all depends on if there's an end user or not. But for this particular proposal, we tried to focus it as much as we could to add some predictability. But within those use tables, there's quite a range of what could come from a commercial, industrial to residential land use perspective.
okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilman Yonker. Any other questions for Councilman Hustis?
I don't know if John Willett wants to get involved in this or not, but every time I hear development out there, whether it be Cipriani or whether it be this, all I hear about Johnson Road is, oh yeah, it's going to be. It's going to be what and when, because we've got Cipriani coming out there, and I understand they're going to help rebuild Yuma Road to its current condition, which is a country road, rounded curves and everything on it. And yet nobody says anything about, well, we're actually going to put up the money for putting the exits there at Johnson Road with 1,000 concrete trucks that'll be using Yuma Road to tear that up while they're pouring concrete. This is the same situation. They butt right up to Johnson Road also. They're going to be needing an exit to get off there for whatever product they put out there. When is somebody going to actually address Johnson Road instead of just pushing it around and saying, I guess the next guy is going to do something with it? Because Yuma is not going to handle all this traffic, even though it may be somewhere in the next 20 years. Yuma isn't going to handle it. When is somebody actually going to say, we've got the money, or we're going to have to put up the money to do something with Johnson Road and get the permission from the state?
Hello, I'm John Willett. I'm acting Director of Engineering. Sorry, I didn't think. I'm just acting. I'm not even sure what I'm doing up here right now.
Stop at acting.
So, Mayor, Councilman Heath, to answer your question, we have a project on the street right now. We are going to select a consultant to actually study the entire Sun Valley corridor, basically from the White Tanks to the Hacienda Festival down to the Gila River, to start determining what improvements are needed in certain horizon years based on what developers are bringing in from a traffic standpoint, what developers are building from their infrastructure standpoint, what holes are needed to be filled in by some kind of regional transportation network exaction fee. We're working on that so we can start having these answers, and I can come up to you in future meetings to say, yes, we know X needs to be built by 2030 or 2035, and there's a mechanism in place to collect the funds and make sure it's done in time, be more proactive rather than reactive. So we have something in the works. I just don't have anything in the defined answers for you right now.
How long is this study going to take?
It'll take about a year, worst case.
In the meantime, is this study going to speed up the stop lights that we ought to have at Palo Verde Road 910?
I am working with ADOT to try to get something done there. Our challenge is that's an ADOT interchange. We don't control it, so I'm working with them to try to get something done.
Just like Jackrabbit. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's all I have.
But we're getting sorely here at 8 o'clock.
Stop acting.
Forgetful of titles and all that stuff. Hey, so the interchange that we're talking about it's west of Johnson. The interchange that would serve this is a completely different interchange than the Johnson Road interchange.
Yes, Mayor, it is known as the Desert Creek interchange. Okay. Yes, it's about, don't quote me the distance, 2.5 miles west of the Johnson Road crossover that's out there today. That would be a future interchange.
Right, and that's a long ways down the road. They have to get this project shovel ready, planning process that we go through on every project, but get to a point where it's shovel ready, and then when we're talking plans later on, then we're talking how we're paying for that interchange out there. Probably best to do, like Councilman said, Jackrabbit Trail first and work our way to the west from there. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that because I didn't want, and that's all, I think that's all I have for you. Thank you. You can back away. Yes. And this, just for the public's benefit, this is a project that was already master planned. There are just some tweaks that they're making to the master plan with staff's input. This is well west, a mile west of Johnson Road, if I understand correctly from the map that's up there. And just like some of these other future projects that are out there, there's a pretty long process, and then the market has to catch up to them out in that far western area. And sometimes, I think Councilmember Yonkers kind of hitting on this, it's a guess as to what that's going to be out in that area. What we're trying to do is just put some definition to that, and planners draw on crayons and crayons, and then when it gets closer to what that's looking like and everything comes in focus, then we start engineering the infrastructure that goes in and drawing those lines a little bit tighter and holding folks tighter to what the plan is at that time. But that could be it could be 5 years down the road, it could be 10, it could be 20. This is a 20-year-old plan, is that correct?
Mayor, that is correct.
Yeah, okay. Okay, and some of this is just reacting to the changes in the market conditions from 20 years ago to today.
That's correct, Mayor.
Okay. Okay. Council, I'm being told to stop talking by text. So we've done our public hearing. I think I've closed that public hearing. I'll just make sure that we have closed that public hearing. And council, for 6B, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to approve agenda item 6B as in boy.
Second.
I have a motion for approval and a second, and that's logged in also. So now we're going to vote. Would you please signify by saying aye if you approve?
Aye.
And vote on the magic memo box. Councilmember Guy, how do you vote?
Aye.
And we have one nay from Councilmember Yonker, and the rest are aye. So the motion passes. Thank you very much. Item number 7, comments from the mayor and council. Any comments tonight?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
I'd just like to bring to the attention, I think everyone here in the room remembers it or knows it, we have a ribbon cutting this Saturday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon for the new Veterans Memorial in Sundance Park. And I believe there's going to be enough chairs, hopefully, that we'll be able to seat everyone that shows up there. I was up there today with a group, and we were going over the procedures and the process on Saturday. I think you'll be quite impressed. I think if you cannot make it, you need to go by there and see the memorial that's been set up for all the branches of the service. We are not shutting down, as some people have suggested, the memorial across the street at Benbow Park. That stays, and it will stay. But this is a newer area set up for a lot more people to have events there. So if you have time Saturday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I suggest you come by. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Really do look forward to being there. That's going to be a great time. And the renderings I've seen, I haven't seen the finished product yet, but look pretty awesome. Okay, anybody else from council? Seeing none, city managers report and summary of current events.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one item tonight. Just want to thank all those who attended the 84th Annual Halloween Carnival. This year, we raised $39,500 for local nonprofits and community groups with 7,100 people in attendance. And that's all I have tonight. Thank you.
All right, thank you. That was a great event as well. Item number 9, proposals for future agenda items. Any from council? I am seeing none. Item 10, with nothing else on the agenda, we are adjourned.